Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind Fintech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor at Fintech Futures, and for this episode we're joined by Dirk Marzluf, Chief Operating and Technology Officer at Banco Santander. Dirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be in the show as well.
Excellent. It's great to have you here. Just to get started, we'd like to quickly let us know a bit more about yourself and your role at Santander.
About myself, I probably would define myself as having done technology my whole life. I think I got my first computer when I was 11. Since then, it's my hobby, my passion as well. My family has been suffering under that passion, to be honest. But at the end, I'm really passionate about technology. And as you stated, I'm Chief Operating and Technology Officer in Banco Santander for the last 5.5 years.
Excellent. Sounds great. And again, great to have you here. And thanks so much for taking the time out to speak with us today. So on the show this week, we'll be discussing core banking. And in particular, we'll be taking a deeper dive into Santander's self-built core banking solution, Gravity, as the bank continues to migrate its operations over to the new platform. We'll cover how the project came about, how the bank has gone about developing Gravity and the steps involved in getting this project completed, the challenges involved in migrating to a new core and how the bank has tackled those, and of course, the key benefits for both customers and the bank in having your own in-house core platform powering operations. That's all to come a bit later, but as always, we will get started with our news and numbers segments. This is where our guest has found an interesting number to discuss and get us started. So Dirk, what have you brought along for us today?
So I have two numbers, I think, that are relevant for you. The first one is 1 trillion technical transactions. Now, at the end, when we talk about banking, we always think like, okay, banks have a bit of IT. Yes, they have some mobile apps. But the massive scale of banking IT really comes alive with that number. It means we have in some of our banks 25,000 transactions per second. To make that work well is quite difficult. And it shows why de facto banks are large IT shops, lots of great talent to make this work. The second point is we do have 53,000 IT people inside and outside of the group working in the IT department. The scale is massive. We always talk about the big techs. No, large banks de facto are big techs. We have 100,000 applications per year for our jobs on the IT side for engineering roles, twice as many as we had in 2022 last year. So it's really something where I believe it's a great place for people that are passionate about technology itself.
Excellent. Yeah. And so for context then, I mean, how would you say 53,000 people working in IT functions compares to the average at banks then? And has this been a strategy right from the top to focus on building your IT teams and laying that groundwork for big digital transformation projects?
I think when you look at large banks, I think the number is probably comparable because at the end, technology is at the heart of banking. And as such, I don't think it's unusual in the sense that large teams are in many of the banks. On the other side, of course, Santander is a very large group, one of the largest banks in the world with 165 million customers. So it is a large retail bank, of course, IT playing a very important role in that context. Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, I mean, 1 trillion technical executions sounds like a huge number. I mean, what was this number like before you started working on Gravity, and what's the trajectory been like there in terms of how much has that number ramped up in recent years?
That one is interesting. We have around 20 to 25% yearly growth. That comes from our own customer growth, but a lot comes as well from the growth of mobile applications, web channels. Because at the end of the day, every time you open your mobile app, it triggers transactions in the background because you need to get all the data to display the information. So what we see today is that we have a massive amount of yearly growth, which exactly is why we need to make sure our core system scale, that we are very cost effective, because at the end, we want to give cost effective service for our customers. And for that, we need to de facto optimize our cost, like with our new core system, where we are reducing by 50% our transactional cost.
I mean, to set the scene then a little bit before we dive into Gravity a bit more, can you tell us how core banking technology has evolved in recent years, and what are some of the key core banking trends and shifts that you've noticed?
I think there are probably three aspects. The first one, I believe the industry is moving from traditional banks with channels to digital banks with branches. And let me define a bit the differentiation. In a digital bank with branches, everything you need to do, you could do digitally. But we define as a bank then specific segments or specific products where we want branches to help with the personalization and the personal advice. And that is, from a technology perspective, a very different setup. Because one is you just plug something on top. The other one, you fundamentally transform how your IT is operating. Another point I think is important, that I wouldn't talk anymore about core systems. I would talk about core data. Because at the end, the core data is where the asset is. That's how we make money. That's where our customers are. And around your core data, yes, there's technology using that core data, and you want to constantly evolve and update that technology. Now, traditionally, in the traditional bank with channels, you had, in a way, a monolithic system on the mainframe where the core data was hidden in a cave behind lots of legacy. And it was very hard to upgrade this technology. That's why I think looking at that core data, that's as well the factor that led us to our gravity approach, is the right strategy. The third point is, I do believe that the thinking is moving away from legacy. So historically, many have said, moving from a legacy you own to a legacy you buy is the strategy. It's like, I have a legacy, the best way is to go to market solution, but de facto those market solutions have become the next generation of legacy. Because with cloud and all of the movements on the technology side, legacy is evolving very quickly. Something that was more than 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, it's already legacy. So de facto, I don't believe that, or I think there's a recognition in the market that going to third-party legacy is not really giving you the step change what you want to do on the innovation side. You need to be in a path where you constantly can innovate and keep your capabilities from the core all the way up into your channel architecture current on an ongoing basis.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Dirk. And I guess moving over to Gravity then, can you tell us a bit more then about how the Gravity project came about? What were the main driving factors behind the decision to develop your own in-house solution? And what were the goals that you wanted to achieve from this?
So let me start with the transformation itself. So our transformation has 3 main aspects. It has product simplification, process automation, and this one global platform, which includes Gravity. So Gravity is not in isolation. It's not the one thing. It's a whole platform component or platform strategy that we follow as a group. So how did it come about? I think we need to look a bit into history on this one, not far back history, but some history. If you look 10, 15, 20 years ago, the only technology that supported transactional volumes for tier 1 banks was mainframe. That's it. That's why all the tier 1 banks are on mainframe. So it was not like a big mistake in the past, whatever. There was just no other technology that was able to do what big banks have to do. We didn't have 10, 15 years ago a trillion transactions, but we had hundreds of millions and no other technology was able to do it at the time. Now, the problem with mainframe and the technology is that this moved from a bank that was a traditional bank with channels. You can easily plug channels into your traditional bank, which was your monolithic mainframe system. That worked. But now when you shift from a traditional bank with channels to a digital bank with branches, suddenly you need to change the overall mindset around your architecture. So you need to move from that one. So the problem is you have your data de facto in a cave hidden behind legacy. You can't access it. It's not real time. It's expensive. It's slow to change. You have plenty of copies of data because the data on the mainframe is expensive. So what great idea everybody has, they take copies of data. So your whole architecture de facto gets poisoned by the fact that data is expensively behind legacy in a cave and you need to access it somehow. And then you have copies, 20 times the copies of the same data. You need to sync it and everything becomes complicated. And the issue is in a way that people thought like the only way out is I do a massive migration. I go to a third-party system. But those migrations for us, it would cost us probably 5 to 10 billion to do those migrations. And the high likelihood for the projects to fail. So in a way, the situation is that you have a problem, but it comes from the past. It's not like you made a mistake. Naturally, we started where banks had to start. But it cornered us into a situation where the perceived only way out was to do massive migrations, but everybody tried it and failed. So de facto, there was no way out. And what we did and how the project came along, I went with my CIO in a room and we said, look, we have a problem. how can we get out of this one? So the idea really was to move the data to a modern place where it's secure, cheap, accessible, and close to the customer. That now sounds easy, like, oh, of course, you take your data and you put it in a safe place and it's cheap and all problems are solved. But there is a problem with it, and there are three problems. The first one is mainframes are very performant. So to run those 1 trillion transactions, we first had to make sure it does work and we can run our volumes. And you have your own probably PC at home. Imagine you run 25,000 transactions on it. It will never work. So the performance had to be checked and tested. The second one is each of our mainframe systems is above 100 million lines of code. It's massive. It's not a million here or a small system or whatever. To change those systems is complex in its own right. And the last issue was of moving the data off de facto is the testing. We have today around 8,500 products in the group. We came down from double that one 3 or 4 years ago. In testing them, there's no knowledge anymore. To test every single product in every single variation is close to impossible. So performance is an issue. It's a huge system and it can't be tested because it's almost impossible. So that's why people were stuck. But the alternative of a full migration, super risky, super expensive, wasn't a great alternative either. So that was the problem space, the cornering. So what we did de facto is the following. We found a solution to the three problems. So the first one is we were able to create a performance platform with very cheap dual core type of pizza boxes de facto that is today beating the mainframe on performance. And we compare to the state-of-the-art mainframes that are in the market. So performance, we were able to solve and beat it, scaling out better. So many technologies being used, but we were able to beat the performance of the mainframe. First tick. Second tick, we were able to automate 98% of the 100 million lines of code migration. That still gives you 2 million lines of code. So it's still not minor, but it's a very different problem than 100 million lines of code. So that one gave us the ability to do that. And so we need around 3 months de facto to make one of our core systems or the core system work. 3 months is a different story than if it would be like 6 years or 5 years. And then the last problem, which was the hardest one and where I would say the most creativity was used. If a system can't be tested, what do you do? Super difficult. So our idea was the following. We said we bring the system into production in parallel to the production system itself. And we replicate every input and output. And that's true for the transactions that come from the mobile, from the web. That is true for any third-party transactions going in the system, any files, everything. And if we then, over a period of, let's say, 3 months, can prove that using those hundreds of millions of transactions, all of them are identical, you de facto have proven that the system is identical and don't need to do any testing of your product itself. And we do this on a level of technical transactions and then functional KPIs. But de facto, if we have a system, and I think probably I learned that at the university at the point, I'm not sure. If the system has the same input-output over a period of hundreds of millions of transactions in our customers, they use every single product. Everything that can be done, de facto, is done by our customers. So instead of having de facto hundreds of business users or thousands trying to invent all of the use cases, de facto 165 million customers are doing exactly that. They test it. Whenever we see a discrepancy, we try to find out and we fix it. So this is a smart way to get the third tick de facto in a box. And then the question is, of course, the benefits. What benefits are we getting out of this one? And I think the first point is that after Gravity, our core systems cost less than 5% of my IT budget. So the core system is not anymore the thing that drags resources, that is the expensive thing that consumes everything. So it's more than 50% reduction versus what we had before. And of course, when we grow, if I double my volumes, and as I said, we grow 20, 25% a year, it's not going up anymore linear. It's very flat in full honesty. The next point is the data accessibility. And I think this is the most important one. As I said, on the mainframe, data is de facto in a cave. It's hidden. It's hard to access. And you need to go through legacy and it's slow and everything else. Now having that data on a cheap modern platform, highly resilient, of course, and secure, suddenly every single new development will go straight to the master data instead of copies all over the place that need to be synchronized and worked on. And just having this one, it simplifies the architecture so much that at the end, there are direct savings, I would say, on the system itself. But the whole architecture and everything simplifies to a point when you end up with, you have a front end or a mobile app, APIs, microservice data. It's the same architecture every fintech uses. While before it went through kicks and here and there and all the way back and COBOL and then all the way front again. So I would say this one, the data, that's why it's called Gravity, because I think there are two reasons. One, my son wrote a program at the time, a game called Gravity Space Jumper, so I love the term gravity, but in reality, the main point is the gravity of your architecture moves from the mainframe down to the front. Very important. The next benefit is events. When we talk about events, everybody says it's a technology, but if you have an event architecture, you can become customer-centric. Imagine you close your mortgage, event, call them, congratulate them. A transfer doesn't work. Or you call the customer and say, your transfer didn't work, can we help you? Or the customer calls and this event is visible to the contact center. So you're straight from the beginning customer-centric. So events de facto make a company customer-centric because you don't respond like the customer gets frustrated and calls you. You know what's going on with the customer and you can respond well. That even includes financial crime and controls for the bank itself. So very powerful. APIs, we are standardizing all the APIs. And as I said before, we have 40 components in the full ecosystem. So I make sure that the backend system naturally plugs via standardized APIs now into our standard channel architecture. So you de facto have a benefit for the whole ecosystem of your IT landscape, which as well is important. The next one is talent. When you look at legacy, and the big issue in legacy is not only the tech, it's that the skills are disappearing. So in a way, a core system needs to run for 15, 20 years. So you need to make sure you have the skills. So as part of the project, we were able as well to go in and say, look, we train up the people, we mix new and old skills and talents. And today what we have in the system is an easy way to say for the next 15 to 20 years, we are done. We constantly evolve the system, but there is no major problem, major migration coming our way for 15 to 20 years. Now we can focus on customer centricity, on our channel architecture, and how we support best our customers. So I think the key one is we had a problem being cornered, like the rest of the banks are de facto cornered, at least the tier one banks. And we found a way out of this corner where now we can focus on what matters to the customer instead of the core system itself. So that's a bit high level where the project was born, where the name Gravity was born, and how we have evolved.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Dirk. I mean, you mentioned there with tier one banks potentially being cornered with their core migrations at the moment. Do you think more large banks will follow suit now and do similar to what Santander has done, look to build their core tech in-house, given the challenges involved with the alternative options that you've mentioned there?
I think at the end, they have no choice. At the end, when you look at it, you have three choices. One choice is do nothing. Now, the do nothing choice has been the preferred choice for probably the last 5 to 10 years for many people in my role, because first people tried to migrate. It was ugly. It didn't work. So everybody learned and said, look, those big migrations don't work. So the first one is do nothing. Do nothing worked because I would say we talked a lot about digital transformation, but it was slow de facto. Now it's really accelerating. What we see with challenger banks growing fast, what we see with generative AI and other technologies emerging, I have to say the time has come that banks need to accelerate their digital transformation, and the legacy, the core system will hold companies or large banks back if they're not somehow finding a solution. The second choice is, as I said, those big migrations, which again, for me, as I said, it's around 5 to 10 billion, which would be a massive project, imagine. The problem wouldn't be just the 5 to 10 billion. The project would take 10 years. And during that period, the business couldn't do anything because they would be busy testing stuff. And there wouldn't be any money left in the first place to invent or invest in anything else. So de facto, the choice is not really a great choice because you freeze your business, you stop innovation, and most likely the project fails and you get fired. So it's not a great choice for people in my role either. So that's de facto, while at least we found for us, and for us it works very well, and I leave it open for my colleagues. But for us, the way we found a way forward is solving that problem. But the problem is there, and the problem is not a problem people can sit on. The problem needs to be solved soon by all the tier one banks, or it's almost like when you swim and you have a stone on your leg. It's dragging you down because it makes everything harder, and speed matters, cost matters. So at the end of the day, that's why I believe all of them have to move. And as I said, at least for us, this was the most optimal way forward as a group.
Yeah, and you announced late last year that you've migrated Santander corporate and investment banking over to Gravity, and you've also successfully migrated all commercial customers in the UK and the consumer business in Chile. So what kind of hurdles and challenges did you face with these migrations? And maybe with the parallel processing you discussed, did that make it a lot easier to migrate those operations?
So I think, interesting enough, the corporate investment bank, we moved into the public cloud jointly with Google. I think when we look at the hurdles, the first hurdle I would say is when we started a project was that people said, yeah, but nobody has done it before, so it can't work. So I believe is everything has been done by others if it can be done. Of course, that's not always true. As I said before, we have a large IT team, we have a lot of horsepower. There are not many companies in the world that could have tried this approach, because to really make the performance work, to make this testing approach work, or to make that migration of that code base, you need to be a very large, powerful organization to make it work. So in that sense, the first point is this general doubt of it must have been done by someone else. So us being the first de facto with this approach triggered a bit of this question mark. I think that the second point was important to explain the business value we are creating with this. Because I would say everybody says our mainframes, or at least as non-technical people say, our mainframe, that's old stuff, we need to get rid of it. Fair enough. But that's not really the reason why we do Gravity. Now, the benefit we had is that even the business case on a pure core system run cost was very attractive. Now, the real benefit case is eliminating the copies of data, the architecture complexity, the speed, the innovation. Those are the real cases. The ability to have event architectures enable the business. But they're much harder to argue because they're a bit softer. It's harder. So the benefit of the project itself was that the business case itself was flying without a big initiative to explain the business value will come from the business itself. Still, we had to explain to them that this is not a technical project. This is not de facto around eliminating mainframes. It's about enabling the business. But the case is so obviously good that on the financial side, that hurdle was doable. Another hurdle, of course, is that when you look into the regulators are very concerned in core system migrations, as they call them, because plenty of them have failed. There were a few spectacular failures as well, where the customer suffered. And as such, when you talk about core system migrations, everybody goes into the brakes. The regulator is concerned, your board is concerned, your CEO is concerned. Everybody says, oof, risky. That could cost me my job. This is a big problem. This could risk the bank. Now, the benefit case we really had is that this dual run approach is an extremely conservative way to do it, or a safe way to do something big. De facto, we are brave, but we are not crazy. We recognized it very well. We first went in the UK for our corporate business. And the UK is a very diligent regulator. And we were able to explain to that regulator all of the safeguarding we have. The fact that you can run it in parallel and you prove everything is identical for a number of months. Then we prove that we can flip into the new system, but keep the mainframe system then as the secondary system. We were able to prove that over number of weeks, we could fall back into the original system. So to be honest, we can run it for a while. And if we would find out 4 weeks later, we go back to the other system. Of course, you don't run the mainframe forever. After 3-4 months, you turn it off. But this ability to prove operational stability, to prove everything is identical, to prove that you could go back to the old system in a defined, relatively quick procedure, is giving a tremendous amount of confidence to regulators, to management, to the board. So you are allowed to do something that inherently was super risky in the past, but de facto with the dual run approach, that risk has been reduced to something that is, to be honest, the gravity migration is still a lot of effort and so forth. But from a risk perspective, it's quite low now. From an effort perspective, of course, it still is a major project. But this risk management approach with the dual run has been instrumental de facto of getting buy-in from the board, getting buy-in from management, and getting support from the regulators because they feel this is a smart, safe way to do something they inherently don't really want banks to do. But if we don't do it, we either way then are cornered long term, so there's no choice.
Excellent. And would you say, I mean, moving forward, would you say that's going to be the future then for banking migrations now?
I don't know. I'm always careful to advise my colleagues in banks. They have their own problems. It is definitely the way forward for us. It works very well, as I stated before, and it's industrialized. So it's a bit of a cookie cutter approach now. So if we've done it now, I think 3 times, and we have 4 or 5 going on in parallel. So de facto, this is now like an engine that runs. It works. So in a sense, I feel the approach itself has a lot of beauty in it. I think the low risk approach, the ability to explain it to the regulator, the ability to move back to the old system in case of any issues, the fact that it's normally the projects run between 12 months and 18 months per bank. To do a core migration 12 to 18 months with a payback period of normally 2 to 3 years max on the core cost itself, not even taking the other cost into account, it becomes, at least for us, a no-brainer. So the accountants love the cost savings. The business loves the event architecture. So there's almost for everybody something in it. So de facto, I would say it's easy to explain to the board. It's easy to get financially support from the rest of the organization because of the fast payback. Low risk, so the regulators like it. So I would say for us, it has been and is, the project will finish end of 24, middle of 2025. It has been or is a very rewarding, good journey. Now, the alternatives at the end are do nothing or migrate. And do nothing I don't believe in, at least long term. Perhaps you can do that for 3 years, but at the point you will regret it heavily, and then it's too late potentially to do the job. And the other one, to migrate, I'm not even sure where you would migrate towards, because I'm not sure there's this magic modern cloud system where you could move towards. But I leave that open. At the end, it might be different for different banks, depending on their own situation and technology stack.
Excellent. And you mentioned that aiming to finish the project by either end of this year or middle of 2025. How is the progress going there at the moment? Is there another big migration lined up next, or are you still on track to achieve that target?
Yes. So in general, as I said, it's a bit of an industrialized cookie cutter approach we have. So we do have now our own Gravity company where we have moved our experts in, and they run it really like an industry for us. The next big one, we as well have in the 3rd, 4th quarter, Chile going live, end of the year or beginning of next year, Spain, Brazil. So at the end of the day, I would say it's now mainly the projects are running. There are, let's say, a cookie cutter processes behind it, and they are well on track to those type of milestones. The risk is well understood. So I think in overall, we are on track and it works very well.
Excellent. And what's the plan then, I guess, moving forward once that's all completed? What's the plan in terms of the further development of Gravity or Santander's digital transformation in general going forwards? Are you aiming to keep upgrading the platform as you go along? Do you plan to add any additional functionality to it as well?
So let's start with the digital transformation. As I said, this move from a traditional bank with channels to a digital bank with branches. As a wording, it sounds easy and cool, but if you go deeper, you really start to tear off the layers of the problem itself. So the first step we need to do is simplification of our product landscape. So as I stated before, we've already taken more than 50% of our products off, doing more business with less products. Now, that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I think there's a good example. You know, I'm old enough to have grown up with Nokia as the phone of choice. And you had so much variety, the 3610s and the 65 somethings and the 85 whatever. So plenty of choices. And then the iPhone came and just blew them apart. So it's not about having the most variety, it's having the best products. And I think that one is important because over the banks have created their own complexity de facto by constantly bringing new things to market, but perhaps losing the fact to say it's the best product that wins and not the most variety. So us simplifying that is super important for our overall platform, not just for the core system itself. The next one is processes. With process mining and other technologies, there are very powerful ways now to understand your processes and optimize your processes. And process automation is not just about cost saving. Yes, we take 40 to 60% of our operations cost out. But when you become digital, you want processes to be real time. You don't want things to go somewhere and then the next day something happens. You want to be able to open an account, it's opened, and you transfer 5 minutes later your money in. That doesn't work if you have manual processes layered behind it. So it's very important that we are moving de facto to a world where you can onboard in 5 minutes into our bank, and 3 minutes later, the first money has been transferred in and your account is working. Versus, as you know yourself, you open an account, it takes 2 or 3 days before it is active, and then the whole process is changing. That one is very important as well. And then, of course, this is all underpinned by a platform where we have 40 components with modules in it. And the core system is one of those components that supports it. And those components are split between the different 5 vertical businesses like retail, commercial, or wealth management, or payments. So in that sense, what is very clear is that our digital transformation is at the heart of what we do as a group strategy. Simplification is necessary, automation, using process mining and the platform approach. And of course, the core system constantly evolves because, as an example, we are at the moment developing a brand new cards functionality because payments is very important. And payments is more and more linked as well with, the card is just a mean to pay, but then you have, of course, other means like with Apple Pay and other technologies. All of that is changing so much. So we are de facto creating or launching now a new cards one. Now, that card platform will naturally just be embedded into the Gravity core. It's now easy because the data is available. That's why I always talk about the data. As soon as the data has been moved out of the cave, you can slice pieces away where you say, we need a modern card system. So we are doing a modern card system, but I don't need to modernize everything else at the same time. So I can step by step modernize, make sure it works and it's aligned with the needs of the business. While there are some pieces that might be on legacy technology, but there's no problem with it. And it might run for another 5 years and there's no issue. So de facto, what I'm saying is the data needs to move. The legacy tech like COBOL is not your enemy per se. You modernize as you go along. You constantly modernize your system. And over time, you create your versions where you have new capabilities on cards, where you have new event architectures. Everything now goes step and step. So I would almost say the Gravity project is almost taking a barrier away. There's always something that made the whole thing stuck. But as soon as we do our Gravity project, the data moves to the front, it's unstuck. And now we can do what every other good technology team does. We modernize, we plug it into our APIs, we move to the front end, we use AI. So all of that one is now becoming a natural evolution versus before.
And yeah, I mean, great. I guess to wrap things up then, what do you think the future of core banking looks like then, and what kind of trends you see emerging over the next few years?
I think an important point is the composability. I think the times where you say, I have a monolithic system that does everything for you, is just over. And the problem, as I said before, is that banks, at least tier 1 banks, are a bit stuck with those monoliths, but that's not how it works anymore. And you want to have this ability to say, I modernize one piece, but I don't want to modernize everything else at the same time. Because that gives you this ability to invest where it matters, to be faster. So to be able to make those components and modules, and as I said, we have 40 components, between 5 and 15 modules probably in each of the components, and our core system being on the same path. Now that the data has been moved, we make sure everything around that data becomes much more modular. And as a result, in a way, it becomes a journey instead of those big things. You can upgrade every quarter. You can come with a minimal viable product. So this becomes a fluid, fast-moving journey versus those big, risky one-off projects that de facto, it costs you a lot of money and quite often they fail. So in my perspective, this composability is happening, and your core system needs to be composable. Now, you could try to buy de facto composable systems in the market, but the issue again is if I take a full core system of a tier one bank, the target system must be extremely capable because it needs to be able to support all the 8,500 products we have in the group. Impossible. So I would almost say the path has to be towards this composability for the whole architecture that we do. And that composable architecture needs to be extended in your core system. And that's the big challenge people in my role have, to find that path into that composability. Another point I think is probably to say that the time has come even for retail banking to globalize. And that doesn't mean you globalize in the sense that the customer interaction is globalized. I think the market understanding remains super important. But the fact that the platform itself can be globalized, underpinning something like a retail business in different countries, is much more emerging than it was like 10 or 15 years ago. That is true then for retail banking. It is true for wealth management. It is true for CIB, for our investment banking business. It's true for payments even more, or for our digital consumer bank, which as well is globalizing. So my feeling is that we are moving from more banking, retail banking being local, to local proximity, local innovation, being close to the customers, but underpinned by global platforms. And that's where the composability is important, the modularization of your components and your architecture. And the core system needs to follow and be part of this journey and cannot be this monolith that stops everything around it in the first place.
Thanks again so much for chatting with us today, Dirk. To close out the podcast, we have our now infamous Fintech Jails. This is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword, or trend that you've seen or heard enough of to cast away into the jail, or of course you can free one of the previously incarcerated terms as well. So what is your selection for this week?
Thank you very much. And I never had before had this power of jailing something or freeing something. So either way, thank you much for giving me this ability. I thought a bit about this one. The natural one would have been Gen AI to be jailed because it's this hype and whatever. On the other side, we need to be careful. It's very powerful. In reality, I would say the hype is crazy, but the reality is powerful. So to really jail it would have been wrong. And I feel I would have jailed something that is real and very impactful for the future. So I would like to jail cloud. Now, what is the reason for that? I think today everything is cloud. You have private cloud, you have public cloud. And there is a misconception in the industry that cloud systems are cool and good, while everything not cloud is ugly and bad. And unfortunately, that's not true because there are plenty of badly done cloud systems. And there are plenty of good systems that are on private cloud or on traditional. So I would say it's a time to move away from cloud magic and say there's good technology and there's bad technology. And cloud supports quite often good technology because it gives you lots of good flexible choices, but it's not something that guarantees that what you do in cloud makes any sense. So in that sense, I think the term has become a bit outreached. I think it was valid for a number of years. I think now it's all about good technology, bad technology, well-designed systems, badly designed systems, versus cloud systems that might be monoliths. So let's be honest. So that's what I would like to put into jail. Now, who do I want to free? I think I would like to free customer centricity. Now, interesting enough, probably a few years back, I would have jailed it with pleasure because I heard about customer centricity probably in my career for the last 20 years. Like, we want to be customer centric, and nothing happened. And it was like this constant repetition of managerial messages of customer centricity. I have to say, today it becomes real. The way we talk about customers, the way we can, with event architectures, truly feel the customer, be there for the customer when it matters. Because what is customer centricity? It's to be there for people when they have events, they buy a house, they have a problem, they want to pay something, it doesn't work. So customer centricity is to feel what's going on in people's life. And today, with technology, we can truly do this. And I feel as well, even now banks know, if you're not customer-centric, we will lose our customers because they have choices. So I feel customer centricity is back en vogue. It's super important. We can do it, and we can practically do it with real actions like event architectures and modeling those events into our customer interactions. So that's what I would like to free out of jail.
Excellent. Yeah, very convincing there, Dirk. I think customer-centric is one of those words that turns up a lot in press releases. So I think that's what got it landed in the jail in the first place. But yeah, it's done some hard time now. So hopefully if we let it out now, it's been rehabilitated and ready to step back into the spotlight. Happy to throw cloud in there as well. I imagine we may have some guests looking to free that one a little bit down the line, but I like your idea of just focusing on the tech and whether it's good or bad. So yes, cloud going in, and happy to let customer-centric back out. But again, thank you, Dirk, for taking the time out to speak with us today. It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure on my side as well, and all the best to you, yeah?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that's all we have time for this episode. Thanks, of course, to Dirk for joining me. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, on X at FinTech Futures, and of course on LinkedIn. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. As always, thank you very much for your support. We'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech, but until then, goodbye.